All right, with the help of Hashem, we are learning Shabbos Daf Chof Tes. We left off on Daf Chof Ches Amid Beis, 5 lines before the bottom of the Amid, and let's quickly recap our sugya. The sugya began with the Mishnah, also on Daf Chof Ches Amid Beis. The Mishnah is speaking about wicks that was made with folded cloth, with folded material. Let's not forget that we just came off the whole sugya of what's considered the beged, what's not considered the beged. Another detail that even though that we learned that when it comes to wool or linen, semer oy pishtan, these are the primary fibers that the Torah recognizes as begadim. If a beged is made out of these fibers, we may not make Shabbos wicks with semer, as we learned in the beginning of Perek Sheni. We had that in the Gemara because it like shrivels up, and it's not a proper wick. So we're speaking here about linen. That's the reality. Now, when you fold a garment, there comes a point where it becomes a halachic wick. Wicks is no longer a beged. A wick is not susceptible to becoming tummy. So the Mishnah speaks about a scenario where there were cloths, patches, little pieces of material. We'll see later today, perhaps what size were they made out of, but we definitely learned until now that if they are 3 by 3 finger breadths, which is shalosh al shalosh, right, it's considered a beged. If one twisted them into a wick and they were not singed in the times of Chazal, we'll read a Tosfos today, it was more common for people prior to really lighting the candle to first singe the wick, making it more susceptible to receiving light, fire. So if you folded it and you singed it, then it's considered a wick. A wick is avada, not susceptible to becoming tamei, and a wick, if it's made out of linen, could be used for Neder Shabbos Kodesh. Case in the Mishnah was it was folded but not yet singed. We have a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Eliezer says just the act of folding doesn't take away its status of a beged. It's still called a beged. Therefore, it's still susceptible to becoming tamei. Number 2, and that's the challenge, you may not use it for Shabbos candles. Why? We'll see. Rabbi Akiva argues with both. Rabbi Akiva says that folding the cloth or twisting the cloth into a wick, even without doing anything other than that, removes its status of a beged. So therefore it's no longer susceptible to becoming tamei, and yes, you may use it to light candles. Now the question is, how do you explain that? What's the issue over here? So the first approach that we have in the name of Rabbi Ada Barahava is that our Mishnah is speaking about this beged made exactly out of 3 by 3 finger breadths, number 1. Number 2, the Mishnah is speaking about a scenario where Erev Shabbos is Yom Tiv. Number 3, there's many steps that we subscribe the Mishnah to the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda that holds that even though one can throw a keli into the fireplace on Yom Tiv, keli was designated a wooden chair. You can say, I'm going to use it for firewood. You're allowed to do that because you're not creating anything new. It was a keli. You're only changing its designation. Therefore, there's no problem using it for fuel on Yom Tov. But if you have an item that when Yom Tov came in, it was a keli. During Yom Tov, it broke. It's called shivrei kelim. This, according to Rabbi Yehuda, now becomes noilad. Noilad means it was an item that didn't exist prior to Yom Tov. Noilad is muktzah. And you can't use noilad, Rabbi Yehuda, shivrei kelim, for a fireplace. And now the Gemara puts it all together. So you have an item that's 3 by 3. According to Rabbi Eliezer, folding it, you folded it before Yom Tiv. It's still called a beged, it's not called a wick. The final, the cherry on top of the cake is that Ula says that when you light the Shabbos candles, it's only considered lit when the majority of the wick that's beyond, that's above the oil, caught fire. If the beged is exactly 3 by 3, so when you begin lighting it, you're not yet fulfilling the mitzvah of lighting Shabbos for candles because the roiv of the wick that is beyond, above the oil has to be lit. But the moment you begin to singe it, in the beginning of the lighting process, it's no longer 3 by 3. So you turned it into shivrei kelim. Now when you're lighting it halachically for Neder Shabbos Kodesh on Yom Tiv, you're burning shivrei kelim. That is the reason why Rabbi Eliezer says that ein madlikim. Now Rabbi Akiva holds that the act of folding the beged prior to Yom Tiv made it halachically into a wick. It's already a wick. If it's already a wick before Yom Tov, it's not noilad. Prior to Yom Tov, it became a wick. That's why you can use it. That is where we're at. And we're going to have on Daf Chav Tes a second approach. We're going to be speaking we're going to read a Tosfos speaking about the singeing of wicks that many people have a minute to do nowadays, whether you have to do it, whether you don't have to do it. We're going to learn we're going to learn Rav's 3 halachas that are based on the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda concerning the din of noilad. We're going to learn how we need to use the tool of bitul beroiv b'chlal in order to have firewood on any yontif, because when you put firewood into the fireplace at a certain point, it becomes shivrei kelim. And then normally you're stoking the coals in the fireplace, turning them over. Why isn't that a problem of moving noilad according to the shita of Rabbi Yehuda? We're going to learn about davar she'enoi mischaven, another machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon, and we're going to have on Shabbos, Tav Chav Tes Amud Beis, a huge machlokes amoraim that attempts to limit the machlokes by davar she'ein mischaven. We're going to speak about Psik Reisha. We're going to have a chiddush according to some Rishonim that even though Abai and Rava, the Amri Tarvayu, that Moed Rab Shimon, B'Psik Reisha v'lo yamus, like Rabbi Yehuda, Chayiv Midoi Raisa, that's only if the Isur is an Isur of Achila, that's only if it's a Malach on Shabbos, by Isurei Hana'ah, we don't care about Psik Reisha. That's a sheet of some Rishonim connected to today's daf, and a lot more. So Chavra, let's continue on Daf Chav Ches Amid Beis, 5 lines before the bottom of the Amid. We just explained properly the first approach of Rav Ada Barahava. And now says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yosef, aha. When I was in yeshiva, they used to quote a Braisa. Now it's very common that Braisas elaborate a specific Mishnah. The Braisa read, Tanina Gimel al Gimel mitzum tzamais. That the case must be where it's 3 finger breadths on 3 finger breadths. That's it, that's the whole Braisa. And when I learned that says Rabbi Yosef, I did not know that for what Mishnah was this Braisa written. But now I get it. It must be for Shabbos Daf Chav Ches. In other words, the whole issue, as we explained, is that since Ula says that the mitzvah of lighting Shabbos candles, it has to catch on the roiv, on the majority of the wick. Since our Mishnah is speaking about a folded garment that began with 3 by 3, when you begin lighting it for Shabbos, you're not yet lighting Shabbos candles. It has to catch the roiv. But when you begin burning it, you rendered it no longer beged, because less than 3 by 3 is not a beged. Now it became shivrei kelim. Like we explained, Rabbi Yehuda, shivrei kelim is noilad, you may not use it. If the Mishnah's case would have been that the beged to begin with would have been, let's say, 4 by 4 finger breadths or 6 by 6 finger breadths, then there would not be a problem even according to Rabbi Yehuda, because it's still considered a beged. It's still considered a beged. Oh, so that Brais is referring to our Mishnah. Now says the Gemara that Omi the Kometaretz Rav Ada Barahava, his explanation of Shitas Rabbi Eliezer was explaining that it follows the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that says Ein Masikin b'Shivrei Kelim b'Yontiv Noilad. Shmami no l'chu'ura, when a Amoira is explaining the Mishnah based on a certain Tanoic opinion, l'chu'ura, it's because he subscribes to it. Shmami no ke Rabbi Yehuda's fidolei. Now I got a problem. Frek the Gemara, Umi Amar Rav Ada Barahava Hachi, does he agree to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, which is that we are bound by the restriction of Noilad? Rabbi Yehuda's sheet again is that Ein Masikin b'Shivrei Kelim b'Yomtiv. The Ha'amar Rav Ada Barahava Daf Chav Tes Nachri, if you have a non-Jew, Shechakak Kav Bibakas Yisrael, that he carved out from a log a measuring utensil. Now he did it. It's very important. If the guy would have owned the log and he would have carved it out, rendering it into a measuring utensil, being that a goy is not bound by any of the halachas of Shabbos and Yom Tif, so potentially that keli was already there prior to Yom Tif, because the goy can do it any day he wants. The log belongs to a Jew. A Jew may not transform raw material into kelim on Shabbos nor on Yom Tif. So therefore, that's really noilad. In other words, this prior to Yom Tif was not going to become a measuring utensil. Now, the guy did it for the Jew. It was the Jew's log, and he made it for the Yid The issue, we're not speaking about the act of doing it, which is an amira la'akum, having hana. We're speaking about noilad, something that was not in the world, came into the world on Yom Tov. So Rav Ada bar Ahava says, masika b'Yom Tov. You are allowed to use it for fuel, for your fireplace, for your stove. This is mamish noilad. Now, if Rav Ada bar Ahava would have agreed with the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, fragt die Gemara v'mai noiladu. And the Gemara says, you know what? Rav Ada bar Ahava paskins like Reb Shimon, who doesn't subscribe to noilad muksa. Our Rav Ada bar Ahava is explaining our Mishnah that the only way you can, it's like a medrash pali of the Mishnah. How do you explain the case of the Mishnah? According to Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva follow Rabbi Yehuda. He doesn't. Answers the Gemara l'divreim the Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva kamer lei, but v'lei lo yisvira lei. Okay, that's approach number one. Now we begin with approach number two. So again, we're up to Shabbos daf chav tes. We're trying to understand why does Rabbi Eliezer say, Yakir, that if you have a beged, that you folded it into a wick, you can't use that to light Shabbos candles. Rabbi Akiva says you could use it to light Shabbos candles. Says Rava, this has nothing to do with noilad, a whole new approach. Hainu tamed Rabbi Eliezer. In the case of the Mishnah noch specified, you folded the wick, but you did not singe it prior to using it. Says the Rava, lefi she'ein madlikim b'psila she'einan mechoyreches. Bechlal, you may not use for Neiros Shabbos a wick that was not charred, that was not singed prior to using it, and similarly, v'loi b'sim martutin, nor with rags that people used to use as wicks. She'einoim mechoyrachim. Why is that? That's the whole topic of this Pedic. Just like certain wicks per se, the material is such that the fire never catches properly. Therefore it might flicker. Therefore on Shabbos you might readjust it and you're creating fire. Even if the wick is made out of good material, the fibers are susceptible to fire. But if it wasn't prior to you lighting Shabbos candles, if it wasn't singed, then it's not going to chop. And after you lit the Shabbos candles, which then you're Makabel Shabbos, then you're going to go ahead and fix it.
And if you singe it?
Then if you singed it, now that it's singed, now it's going to catch properly. Now it's going to light properly. That's a very important statement. In other words, it has nothing to do with the details that we spoke about. Tosfos here, I'm scooting down 5 lines from the top of the Amid, the top Tosfos. Tosfos says that we don't follow this nowadays at all. V'nira li, the bechinam nohagu anoshim lahadlik hapsila v'lachboisa. That there's no need for many men nowadays to singe the Shabbos candles. Singe means they light it and they put it out. And why? In order for it to be muhavaheves, in order for it to be singed. Because even according to Rava is explaining the sheet of who? Of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is known as Shamuti. Shamuti has 2 meanings. It means that he was put into a cherem. It means he follows generally the shita of Beis Shammai. We don't paskin like Beis Shammai. Now there is, I just want to mention it, there's another inyan why men, my father used to do it, would singe the Shabbos candles, is because it's interestingly that when we speak about the mitzvah of lighting candles, how it's primarily on the Akeres Habayis, we always speak about Hadlakas Neders. Like, the Chana. Chana's Rosh Tevas, the mitzvah for the women, right? Chala, Nida, Hadlakas Neders. Chala, Nida, Neders. Or Hafrashas Chala, I don't know, Tfila b'mikvah, Hadlakas Neders. By the Neders, we don't mention Neders, we say Hadlakas Neders, because that's exactly the point. Just like in the Beis HaMikdash, there were 2 steps. There was the prep of the Neders that was done in the morning, Hatavas HaNeders, it's a separate mitzvah. And then there is the Hadlakas HaMenoira, same thing with Shabbos. That there is an inyan that the Hadlakas HaNeders is on the woman. But the prep of the Neiros should be, ideally, the man should have a part in the mitzvah. And way a man will have a part in the mitzvah, one way is to set up the candles, another way is to singe it. Not because if not for that, the wick is not, according to Rabbi Eliezer, not good enough of a wick. But it's a separate inyan of a man having part in the great mitzvah of lighting Shabbos candles. Anyways, let's come back over here. Ve'elo, back in the Gemara, Hadutani Rabbi Yosef. We just quoted that there was a brisa that Rabbi Yosef learned in yeshiva. He had no idea for what Mishnah was this brisa said. The brisa writes, Gimel al Gimel mitzum tzamis. Whichever Mishnah it is, it must be the case where it's exactly 3 by 3. Now, according to Rav Ada bar Ahava, that was a great explanation. The whole issue is that since we follow Ula and you have to burn the roiv of the wick, and in the beginning of the burning, you didn't singe it before, you turned it into a wick, it's no longer 3 by 3, it's not a beged, so now it's noilad, it fit. But if you are rejecting that explanation, so tell me which other Mishnah is a Mishnah for which there is a brisa upon it that's going to say, 3 by 3, Lamai Hilchas answers the Gemara, I'll find you a Mishnah. Le'inyan Tumah, Tetran, we have a Mishnah in Kalim, Gimel al Gimel Sha'amru, there we're speaking about items that are susceptible to corpse Tumah. Bigadim, and again, this is the sugya that we learned in the last few daf, that a garment, even if it's only a patch, if it's made out of either wool or linen, is halachically considered a beged if it's 3 by 3 finger breadths. So their Mishnah there says, chutzman hamalol, it must be that the patch has 3 by 3 aside of the hem. You should know that the reason why a piece of garment is called a beged is because aniyim would use it to patch their garments. Prior to patching the garment, they would take that little material, that cloth, and they would make a hem for it. They would sew the periphery, the outer part. That's the way it was done. So the 3 by 3 is a side of the additional fibers that are used by the tailor to make a hem. These are the words of Rab Shimon. The Chachamim hold Gimel al Gimel Mechuvanes. Everyone agrees that the way a tailor would use a little piece of material for a patch would be first he would make a hem. But if the material to begin with was 3 by 3, him making a hem means he has to fold over the edges, which means at the end of the story, you won't even have 3 by 3, he will still use it. What makes something a beged is the fact that at least aniyim will use it. So since you see a machlokes in Masechtas Kelim, the Braisa is siding with the Chachamim. That's the meaning of the Braisa, Gimel al Gimel mitzum tzamis. Even if it's only 3 by 3, prior to you making the hem around it, that is where we say it's considered a halachic beged. Now that we mentioned this whole topic of noilad, of whether a noilad would mean something that came into the world on Yom Tov. It was like born on Yom Tov. We're going to have this topic more in the beginning of Masechtas Beya, beginning of Masechtas Beitza. Machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon, whether noilad is muktzah or not. So now, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav, we're going to quote actually 3 statements of Rav, all based on Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. Number one, Rav paskins like Rabbi Yehuda of Noilad, and therefore Masikin bekalem on Yom Tov, you can add to a fire. Even midrabanan, you can add to a fire. You can even take a keli that was previously designated, like we said, a chair, and when you can choose to put it into your fireplace. Nothing wrong with that because the item itself is not muktzah. Masikin bekalem, but that's if when you're putting it into the fireplace, it's a keli. But if it broke on Yom Tov, now there are details. Some kelim, if they break a little bit, if they're still functional, they're not noilad. But if it broke to the point that their original designation is no longer going to be carried out, broke, so even though you can put it into the fireplace, not this, you get it because it's noilad. It's something that came into the world prior, wasn't muchand prior to Yom Tov. Really, they point out that the Rav is not adding anything, but he begins right by quoting Machlokes Rabbi Yehuda Rab Shimon, and we know from other areas that Rav paskins like Rabbi Yehuda. Number 2, Masikin b'tmarim. If you have a date which was designated for human consumption, if you want to use it for fuel, also not a problem on Yom Tov. But if acholan, if you ate it on Yom Tov, now what do you have? Pits. Pits are flammable. Date pits. Same concept. When the pit was in the date, it wasn't called a pit. It was considered oichel because it was adhered to the food. It was bottled to the food. Now that you have a pile of pits, you can't use it on Yom Tov. Acholan en masikin begarinayim. According to Rabbi Yehuda, now guys, if I ate pits prior to Yom Tov, yes, I can use it for fuel because the pits were in the world, and that's what people did with the pits, at least as an option. Here, you ate it on Yom Tov. That's a classical another case. The Gemara is going to explain why do we need to have it. Normally, once you paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, you don't have to give different examples. Every example has a chiddush. Rab Shimon, who does not subscribe to noilad, is matter. Number 3, similar masikin be'egoizim, you can take a walnut and throw it into the fireplace. A chiddush, even though prior to Yom Tov it was designated for achilas adam, doesn't matter. It's not muktzah. Now you can change its designation on Yom Tov, but if you ate it on Yom Tov, now what do you have left? The klipa, the outer wooden klipa, ein masikin be'klipa same. David Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon Matir. Gemara wants to know, why does Rav have to quote 3 Rabbi Yehudas? Vitzricha, the Iyashmin and Kamaiso Shivrei Kelim. One would have said by Yehiko Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Why does Rabbi Yehuda disallow you to use broken pieces of keli for firewood? Mishum demikara keli. Prior to Yom Tov, it was a bona fide keli, whatever keli it was, and now it's a shevet keli. Shevet keli means you can't use it for its original function. That's your classical v'havalei noilet. That's why it's usher. And a chanami. But one might have thought, avol tomatim date pits, case number 2, the mikara got in them, the pits were there before. You can't say there was no pits. Today when you go buy dates, you'll have pitted dates, non-pitted dates. You understand? They're more ba'olam. So one might have thought, and now they're right there pits. In other words, when you ate it, let me word it this way, did you transform the pit? It's even better than the walnut shell by the klipa before it was complete. Now it's broken. The pit is the same. So Ema, maybe even Rabbi Yehuda will agree. You get it? That's not called noilat. Shaper dummy. And if he ashmin and garinim, I would have thought, I know you didn't transform it, but at least prior to you eating the date was not visible. And something being visible has a lot of halachic weight if it's visible to the naked eye. But when it comes to the klipam of nuts, they were exposed before they are on the outside. Bottom line is, in all of these cases, all of these 3 cases, Rav Yehuda, based on his greater b'chlal application of muktzah, in our case, noilad, won't allow you to use it. Says the Gemara, now that we had the statement in the name of Rav, and let's go back to the case of dates, that the date pits are noilad. Rav never said that explicitly. It was learned from a certain story, and the Gemara is going to challenge the understanding of that story. What was the story? The Rav, once Rav himself, this is during a week, this is not during Yom Tov, this is during a weekday, he was eating dates. And as he was eating the dates, V'shoda kashiyasa in Aramaish is pits. He would throw the pits, lebuchya, directly into the fireplace. He was eating pits and throwing the pits in the fireplace, eating dates. And Omar laid up Chia, Bar Pachsi, son of nobles. What was Rav's father's name, guys? You remember? Ivu, right? Psachim Davdalet. Anyway, so Ivu was a nobleman, so he called him son of nobleman. Kenegde b'Yom Tov Aser. This on Yom Tov cannot be done. Clearly, Rab Chia held that the din of Noilad Muktzah that Rabbi Yehuda spoke about by Shivrei Kelim is applicable to date pits. Now, Rav never said it. Rav didn't protest against it. So that's why people thought that he's moided to it. Now the Gemara says, maybe not. You don't have to pick every fight. Could be someone tells you something, you don't agree with it, but you're busy eating pits, you know. Kibla b'nei or like kibla b'nei. Did he really accept it or not? So Tashema, Tichiyas Rav, Libavel. Now this case was eating pits on Yom Tov, if not the flow won't go. Ochal Tamri, he was eating dates. V'shada Kashiyasa lechevas, he was throwing the pits to animals. Now here again, if the pits are noilad muktzah, can't throw them to animals. Now we're going to go into another nuance. There are Persian dates and they are Aramean dates.
But you have the pit.
So you have the pit in your hand, and therefore, I
would think that would be the most benign thing to do, would just be to throw it towards the animals.
Maybe you just took the plate later and throw it.
Well, let me word it. You can't do that. You can't do that, even if it's muktzah. In other words, there's something called garaf shel re'i. When you eat pits and they make a pile on the table, how are you allowed to move it? Because it's disgusting. But you have to throw it into the garbage. If you're making use of it, you're saying that it's not that disgusting. It's usable. Okay. And Shuki, you're right. If it's already in your hand, once muksa b'chlal is in your hand, we paskin you can move it anywhere. L'chatchila, once it's in your hand. It must have been a pile. Oh, so the Gemara says, my love, we're speaking about the Farsi Yasa, Persian dates. What's Persian dates? Persian dates is dates that when you eat the pit, none of the pedi adheres to the pit. Not because the Persians are making the best of every little inch of flesh of the date, because it's superior. Kevin, don't get upset with me. It's because it's superior dates. They're not gluttons, they're not beers, like the Gemara says. No. But they're not, so that makes a big difference, because if there is some fruit stuck on the pits, we can still consider it oichel. It's no longer muksa. So l'chayra, that was the case where the only reason why Rav was allowed to do it was because v'loy kibla, he didn't accept what Rab Chia told him. And like the Gemara said above, you can argue that from shivrei kelim and even from the nuts, what underwent the least transformation was the date pit. It didn't change at all. You didn't even break it. It's not called noilat. So the Gemara says no. The story was ba'ara ma yasa. It was Arameans pits. In other words, it was dates. Aramisha dates that are, Rashi says, inferior. So when you eat it, you can't fully eat all of the flesh, and therefore, the only reason Rav was allowed to feed it to the animals, imayu, the mother here means the fruit itself. There was some mother left on the pit. So that is still oichel. When pit is glued on, stuck onto food, then it doesn't have a din of noila, it has a din of food. That's why he was allowed to do it. But indeed, Rav accepts, and we quoted Rav correctly, that 3 applications of noilad, one of them will be the date pits. Omar Rav Shmuel bar Chanel Rab Yosef. Rabbi Yehuda, the Omar Masik in the Kelim, I have a bomb question. Every time you put something into a fireplace, so like this, if I put a log, nothing changed. But if I put a keli, Rabbi Yehuda allows for me to put a keli. I can take a chair on Yom Tiv and say, you know what, I'm cold, fireplace. At some point, it's going to be shivrei kelim. At some point, even if you were to take it out, you can't use it as a chair. Which means, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's muktzah. The way people use a fireplace, every now and then you have to put a piece of metal in there and you have to stoke the flames. How are you allowed to stoke the flames? Now it became shivrei kelim, kiv and the adlik b'hu purta. You could use a keli. Or when you put in a log, it doesn't transform itself. The log became bigger, it became smaller. But when you put a keli into a fireplace, at some point, when it burns a little bit, havi le shivrei kelim. And now, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's muksa. If you're going to go ahead and you're going to stoke it, you're going to turn it over, is bisura kamahapech. How are you allowed to do it? And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda should have said, you may not even use kalim, because if you're going to use kalim, you're going to end up moving noilad muksa. The Gemara says, the only way you can use kalim, that Rabbi Yehuda is doing like taught by Rab Masna. The Amar Rav Masna, Amar Rav, similar case. What happens if you have eitzim shenachnu min hadekel, if you have a branch that fell out of a date palm tree over the fireplace on Yom Tiv? Now, a branch that was broken off the tree on Yom Tiv is oichit noilad. Can you use it? Yes, you could use it, but what you need to do is marbe eitzim muchanim. You have to first add wood that was prepared prior to Yom Tiv for the fireplace. And we are lachatchila being mevatel muktzah. Normally, ein mevatel in isur lachatchila. Here, noilad muktzah is only midrabanan. So our sugya holds that by isurei derabanan you can lachatchila be mevatel. That's the approach of many Rishonim. And then umasikon must be that when Rebbe Yehuda says that masikin b'shivrei kelim, what you have to make sure is that the shivrei kelim is the minority of the fuel in the fireplace. Wow. And if not, you got yourself a problem. Weiter. Approach number 3. Going back to the Mishnah. Rav Amnuna says, Arhache bepochus mishloish al shloish askina. Atkan, guys, we were focusing more on the second din in the Mishnah, whether madlikin ba. Rabbi Eliezer says ein madlikin, Rabbi Kiva says madlikin. Let's focus on the first part of the Mishnah. The Mishnah was speaking about a psilas habeged. It means you have a little beged, you folded it over, you didn't singe it prior. Is it susceptible to becoming tamei or not? just explain the beged is susceptible to becoming tummy. Wick, not susceptible to becoming tummy. Once you singed it, you made it into a wick. Here you didn't singe it, so the first machlokes was simple. Rabbi Eliezer says that you were not mevatel its beged designation. Therefore, he holds it's still temeya. Rabbi Akiva holds that by you folding it, you twisting it, without burning it, without singeing it, without sewing it, that in itself makes it into a wick. He's going to add a whole nother layer, a big layer. Now, guys, like this. Again, this is going back to the beginning of the sugya that tzemer or pishtin, even only 3 by 3 finger breaths, shalosh al shalosh, has a din of a beged. If you also remember, we learned, and Rav introduced that even shar habegadim, once you have shloisha al shloisha, any fiber is considered a beged. Can I ask you a question? If I have a halachic beged, and I decide, for me it's a shmata, I'm going to use it for something very insignificant. I didn't change it, I just set it aside to use it as a shmata. Does that take away its status of beged? And here's the answer. If the beged is shloisha al shloisha, 3 by 3 tfachim or bigger, then just me deciding to use it for something insignificant doesn't change its halachic status of beged. But if something is very little, anywhere between shalosh al shalosh until shloisha al shloisha, it's less than 3 tfachim. We already said only aniyim use it for a patch. Kam, it's a beged. Here, you should know that my decision to use it for something halachically insignificant will already take away its status of beged. That's step number 1. Step number 2, what happens if after I designated it for something insignificant, I change my mind? Can I re-render it into a beged? That's the case of the Mishnah. Let's read it inside. How great is it? If it's shloish al shloish. Oh, so once you do an action, very good. Once you do an action, bepoil, that makes this halachically insignificant, then for sure it's insignificant. You will mevatel it be a dime. So let's go. So says the Gemara that here we're speaking about a garment that's less, not than 3 finger breadths. Guys, remember, shalosh is finger breadth, shloishas tvachim. It's a beged that's less than 3 shloishal skinon umikule matlani yashanokan. And here we're speaking about the din of designating a beged for a insignificant use. That we're lenient, Shleima, that only the mental designation for insignificant takes away its status of beged. And Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Akiva, l'shito sayu. V'oz Rabbi Eliezer l'taimei, v'Rabbi Akiva l'taimei. And Mishnah, the Tanan, Mishnah and Kalim. Pachus mishloish al shloish. Now here the Mishnah is going to give you 3 examples of what's called insignificant. Example number 1. She'iskinu lepakek or lepkak boy esam erchatz. You have a bath, you want to have a plug. Until today, what's a good plug if you don't have your plastic plug? Take a shmata and stick it in there. That's called insignificant. So if you designated a garment that's less than 3 by 3 tfachim, either to stop up your bath. Number 2, when you take a pot off the fire, your hands can get burnt. So sometimes you need as a shmata to interpose, so you shouldn't get burnt. That's also called insignificant. Number 3, you have a millstone, you want to clean it down, you designate it for these 3 purposes. That's step number 1. You have to know how to read this Mishnah. Right now, this cloth doesn't have a din of a beged. If a source of tumah touches it, not tummy. But now you went ahead and you stored it away. You stored it away for some other purpose. Now we're going to see there's 2 types of storing it away. Says Rabbi Eliezer, bein min hamuchen, bein she'ein min hamuchen, whether it's a storage that's considered prepared, more chashuv, we'll see in a moment what it is. Whether it's you stored it for something that's not considered, the word muchen here means a significant purpose. You says Rabbi Eliezer Tamei, the act of storing it away is re-machshavit. You guys are good? Amazing. Divided Rabbi Eliezer. In other words, the act, you see, Shlema, I did an action, but I didn't change it. I put it in a storage place. So putting it in a storage shows how the owner now is machshav it. What does it mean for muchan and not muchan? The Gemara will explain.
Right, but you didn't use that.
Even though I didn't use it.
Only if you didn't use it for as a shmata.
You used the ring for shmata.
No, he's right. Shlomo is right. I didn't yet use it as a shmata because machshava mevatel machshava ve'em machshava mevatel ma'isa. This is the whole sugya we have over there. In other words, there was a first designation for insignificant, no longer beged. Now I put it in a storage place, no matter for what. Rabbi Eliezer says beged, re-beged. You re-begeded it. The second to last line. Rabbi Akiva says, Min amuchan tamei. I'm sorry, I skipped Rabbi Yeshua. Thank you. Rabbi Yeshua Oimer, the opposite side. Bei min amuchan min shaloi min amuchan. I don't care for what purpose you stored it. The act of putting something in a storage does not demonstrate anything. Once you designated it to lepakek bayas hamerchatz, unless you do something to it, it's not yet a beged. Tahor. And Rabbi Akiva differentiates min hamuchan, if the storage is for something muchan, again we'll see what that means, that's already chashuv. So then you're storing it, remachshav it. Tamei, shloim and amuchan tahor. Now what's this muchan? So let's clarify that. V'amarula. Or v'itema, others say that this came from Rabbi Bar Abchanan and Rabbi Yechanan. Look at the bottom line. Hakol moedim, everyone agrees that if the storage is zarkul ba'ashpa, you throw it in the garbage. That doesn't demonstrate anything. You stored it in the garbage. Shkoyach, you put it in your garbage. Divrei hakol tahor. Why would that re-beged it? Daf chav tes amid beis. Oh, if you put it in a chest, if you put it in your drawer, divrei hakol tamei, because it was your intent to use it to wipe the millstones that took away the status beged. So your new intent of putting it in a drawer, you're going to use it. You would not use a shmata made for the rechaim. You wouldn't put it away in a chest. That for sure is mavatal. No one argues that. Loi nechliku. Where do we have the machlokes? Ella. Now listen, there's two levels. Either sheteloi b'maga, you hung the rag on a peg. That's considered something more significant. Or shehinichel achayre adelis, you hung it behind your door. Till today, it's that way. If you're neater, you have a peg. In yeshiva, behind the door, you find up something to hang something up. These are two types of. It's not as chashiv as putting it in the chest, but you didn't put it in the garbage. Now let's go through all the shittas. Rabbi Eliezer holds, midoloi zarko ba'ashpa, the very fact that you didn't throw it in the garbage, you're hanging it up even if it's only behind the door. Even if it's only behind the door. Dati ilavi. That means you plan to use it for something, yes, significant. And why is this called shaloi min hamuchan? Telagabi kufsa lav ben hamuchanu. It's not considered muchan as far as a kufsa is concerned. Rabbi Yeshua holds midoloi yinicha b'kufsa punkt fakir the other direction, that if you don't put it in a chest, even if you did something beyond hanging it behind the door, you put it on a peg, you didn't re-beged it, you were not machshav it. Batule batle, you already nullified it before, and this is not enough, my friends, right? To remake it chashiv. You didn't put it in a chest. Why is it called muchan? Talagabe ashpa muchanu. Rabbi Akiva will say the following: if you you hung it on a peg, that's a more, let's say, chashiv place to store things. That is like, he's the holds like Rabbi Eliezer, which halachically it would be like you put it in a chest, you were remachshav it. Now that beged is susceptible to becoming tamei. That is Rabbi Akiva. Now, guys, our Mishnah, we didn't mention Rabbi Yeshua was Rabbi Eliezer, and it was Rabbi Akiva. So the Gemara says, before we bring it back over here, ultimately, Rabbi Akiva holds, like Rabbi Yeshua, that in both cases, it's not considered a retraction, and that's the Mishnah, Pashut. So when the Mishnah speaks about the beged, whether it's Tameya or whether it's Tahira, it must have been that case. First, you were b'machshava, you designated it to be a rag. Now you folded it for a wick. Is it a beged? Is it not a beged? That's mamash the machloikes. Fragt die Gemara, how do you know that Rabbi Akiva completely agrees with Rabbi Yeshua? Mimai, maybe the case of the Mishnah will be similar to putting the rag behind the door. That's really the Gemara's kasha. Which is why Rabbi Akiva holds, maybe Rabbi Akiva holds that if you put it on the peg, it's chashav. He would have said Tameya. The case of the Mishnah is only because it's like a chayri adelis. How do you know that later he fully agrees to Rabbi Yeshua? Amar Rava, mi diktani psilois habeged. You made a wick right from a garment. My iri the tani psilas habeged litani psilas shel beged. My psilas habeged. It's still a beged. Now hold on. If you didn't at least hang it on a peg, it's not called a beged, because the case was first you completely nullified it by designating it for a rag. So that's the diuk that ultimately he was moida to Rabbi Yeshua. So now we have a total of 3 approaches on, at least the final one is concerning the Tmei and Tahira, that it's connected to this additional step that the Mishnah doesn't mention. We figured it out. First you were mevatel it, now you want to redesignate it. Okay, Chavra, new Mishnah. Now we already mentioned above that just like adding fuel to a lamp is asar on Shabbos, mitam havara, removing oil from a lamp is called machaba. No one debates that. Case of our Mishnah will be interesting. You have a double lamp. Now maybe you can find a picture for that. What do I mean by a double lamp? You have the keli in which there is the wick and oil, and above it or on the side of it there was another receptacle. The picture, whoever sees the picture, that's the second case. The first case is you have a keli above it. They would sometimes take an eggshell. They would put a little hole inside the eggshell. They would put oil in it, and it would slowly drip into the bottom keli. Do we say that the oil on the top keli or the side keli is already part of the lamp, and removing oil from there is also considered machabe or not? That's the topic of our Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, Lo yikoiv adam shefayferesh al beitza. A person should not perforate an eggshell. That's just one of the reality of what they did. V'yimalena shemen, and fill it up with oil. V'yetnen al pi aner, and put it on top of the lamp. Guys, all of this was done before Shabbos. Don't use such a lamp for Neder Shabbos Kodesh. Don't use it. Why?
To extend the time that's going to be.
To extend the time. Yeah. Why? Bishvil, and the reason why you put the eggshell, Bishvil shetei min natefes, in order for it to drip into it. Why may you not use that for Neder Shabbos Kodesh? Because the Chachamim were afraid that you might remove the oil from the top keli. And that's true, vafilu hi sholcheres, even if this top reservoir was not an eggshell, was made out of earthenware, and earthenware, especially if it's near fire, it becomes repulsive, becomes black, and the items in it also become more repulsive. So one might have thought that no one anyways will remove oil from the top keli, as they wouldn't from the bottom keli. We don't say that. There is no fire burning in the top keli. However, Rabbi Yehuda is matir. You know why? Not because he says you could remove it, guys. You may not remove it. Rabbi Yehuda holds, just like you can light a lamp. I have a kasha. How can you light a lamp with oil? Maybe you're going to remove some oil. Everyone knows that you can't remove oil on Shabbos. Since the keli is mamish on top, everyone knows that it's connected. If it's connected, no one will remove it. Avol im chibra hayoytzer mitchila, but if a potter attached this reservoir, he's not going to attach a eggshell. He's going to attach this klei cheres to the bottom one. They are physically attached. Even the Chachamim will agree that you can light a candle in the bottom one. Mutter. Why? Because everyone sees when pnei kli echad. It's physically connected. Everyone knows you can't remove oil from the lamp. They will not remove it from the top one either. Another case, similar case, but the Mishnah has to give it again. Not one keli above the other, but one keli on the side of the other. One may not fill up a bowl of oil, and put it on the side of a lamp. And what does that help? Because what they would do then is that they would take the wick that was in the original lamp, a longer wick, and they would have the wick also go into the neighboring keli. So it would siphon oil from the neighboring keli. The same thing. V'yiten reish hapsila b'toicha, and people would put the reish hapsila means the unlit side of the wick would be put into this neighboring keli. Why do people do that? In order for it to burn longer, because it's going to suck out the oil. So says again the Tanna Kama, you may not light the principal one, because the side one halachically is feeding the fire. One might remove it from the side one, you may not do so. So midrabanan don't even light it, and Rabbi Yehuda again holds. Now people see that they're connected, and just like everyone knows you can't remove oil from the lamp itself, no one is going to remove oil from the side. We're not chayish to it.
What about to refill directly the skating with Shabbos?
Mevayir, havara, isodorais.
Just like if you put it in, if you refill the keli, it goes inside and it's not.
You cannot refill the keli. Now, if it's indirect, then it's going to be midrabanan. But direct is going to be havara midorais.
Extending a Shabbos timer. Like when
Extending a Shabbos timer.
it's already on.
Let's leave that for another. That's a big topic. Okay, weiter. You can't compare it. You can't compare one case to the other. You understand why? Here you're actively putting something in here. You're putting in the fuel.
The second keli. The first.
It doesn't matter. The second keli, the first keli is just about, is it's called gram or is it not gram? But putting in the fuel is different than extending. You're not adding electricity, you're just taking away the switch that's going to stop it. I'm not saying you can do it, but that's a whole different thing. Now, why did the Mishnah have to give two cases? Vitzricha, one on top, one on the side. If we only would have taught the case, the first one, shifay fereshal beitzam, or the shifay, or the cheres, the one that's on top, I would have argued only over here that the Tanna Kama, that the Chachamim hold that what? You may not light the candle, because kivan deloy me'isa, in the case of the shifay feres, there's really three cases, right? There's the eggshell, very good. There is the top reservoir made out of cheres, and then there is the side. So therefore, one may be asir le'istapu kemina, someone will make use of the oil in the eggshell on Shabbos. And then he'll be doing mechaba. Aval, if the top one is made out of cheres, is made out of earthenware, since physically the me'isa, it's more repulsive, that you can do it. That's why the Tanna Kama gave the additional case of Shol Cheres. And if the Tanna Kama only would have added the second case without the third, V'i Ashmin and Shol Cheres, one again would have thought only that case. If the Mishnah only would have given that case, only B'hak Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Mater, because it's Me'isa. Aval B'hahi, meaning by the Shifay Feresh Shel Beitza, Emamoidel Rabbanan. Very good. So the first two we got. V'i Ashmin and only the first two. I would have again argued only Bahani Ka'amar Rabbi Yehuda Mishum Deloy Mifsak. Why is he matir? Because people know it's one keli, guys. When one is on top of the other, it hangs, so to say, within the walls of the bottom. I don't mean that it went inside the walls of the bottom, but it's within the airspace. It means when you look at it, Rabbi Yehuda says you see one keli. Masha'en came the safe of the Mishnah, where it's one on side of the other, it's two separate kelim. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda will be moided that people won't know that it's one keli. People might make use of it. Avol the safe of the Mishnah. The mifsika is placed on the side. It looks completely separated. It's just that the wick goes also into the second one. But it's two completely separate kelim. Maybe he would be moided to the Rabbanan, that it's also mid Rabbanan. Guys, this is an Isur the Rabbanan to light it, because maybe someone on Shabbos will take out from the reservoir. And why didn't you only quote that case? V'i Ashmi'inan, only the final case of the Mishnah. Then I would argue, Bahi Kamer Rabbanan, they're Machmer. Because it's separate keli. One might have thought, Avo Bahani Tarta, the first two, one is on top of the reservoir, is within the airspace, on top of the other. On top, but it's within the limits, within the boundary of the bottom one. That the observer will look at it as one keli. They'll never remove it. If there's no chashin on that they're going to remove it, you can light it. Saricha, all of the cases.
Do you need the second case?
You need all the cases? Yeah.
You can't have the first and the third?
Can't have the first and the third.
Because of the cheres.
Because of the cheres. Because it's me'isa. That's the chiddush. You would think that Rabbanan there will be lenient. Now, and then the Mishnah says, if they are a potter means a professional, connected the reservoir to the lamp, top to the side, then everyone sees it's one keli, no one will remove it, you can light it. Problem is, it says in a braisa that if chibra besid, if you connected it with plaster or becharsis with clay, then mutter. Now guys, plaster and clay is something that even the balabas knows how to use. Yoitzer is mashma really professionally. So does it have to be connected professionally? That's the Mishnah. The Braisa seems to imply even if it's only a home connection with plaster or clay, even not by the potter. So the Gemara answers, the Mishnah and the Braisa are not arguing. The Mishnah doesn't mean it has to be done by an actual professional. It just means that if the Balabas did it semi-professional, which is using clay, using plaster, that alone is good, even lachachabim. Once it's connected, it's connected. Tanya, we learned in the Braisa. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Pamachas, there was a time that Shiv Vosenu, that we spend Shabbos Ba'aliyas based Nitzah, the Lud, in the attic of the house of Nit, the name of a family, in Lud. And Ve'eviu Lanu, and they brought for us, guys, an Erev Shabbos, of course, Shefefere Shel Beitzah, they brought for us this device which would extend the life of the lamp, of the fire. Umilei nuha shemen, and we filled it up with oil all out of Shabbos, and vinak vinuha, and we made a little hole under it which will allow the oil to slowly drip out, and vihinachua, and we placed this shefefere shel beitzah al pi haner, on top of the lamp. Was we created the exact device that our Mishnah is speaking about. This is who saying the story? Rabbi Yehuda, not Rabbi Yehuda, Takez Matir, but he was not by himself. Everything is B'lashon Abim. And V'hayisham Rab Tarfin, and the Zekenim, V'lo Amru Lanu Davar. In other words, everyone ultimately agrees with my opinion. Amru Lo, they told him, Misham, Raya, that's different. Why? Shani based Nitzah, this reasoning. This is a big statement. Most cases, whenever the Chachamim make a Gzeira, loy plug. The Tanakam of our Mishnah, the Chachamim have a Gzeira. Here there's a story where Rabbi Yehuda did what he holds you could do. Rabbi Yehuda did it. Or the Talmid of Rabbi Yehuda. The other Chachamim didn't protest, not because they were moided to Rabbi Yehuda. They felt that in this setting, what's the Chayshinon? That maybe someone will take oil out of the Shefefere Shel Beitzah. No one there would do that. So that's why we didn't protest. But it doesn't mean we agree with you.
So his Gezerah that doesn't apply.
Sometimes we say that the Gezerah was not made across the board, or at least it was made across the board, but they didn't protest. Maybe that's the pshat. We didn't protest because over here we knew no michshel is going to happen, and you did it. You hold you can do it. Another story. Oven from Tzipoira. Garar Safsula, he dragged a bench Ba'aliyasa desheisha, on top of a marble paved floor. Now, guys, the whole issue of dragging a bench, which is the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon regarding davar she'ein mischaven, an unintentional act, is when you're dragging a chair or a bench on an earthen floor where you're going to make a furrow, or you might make a furrow. Marble is not furrowable. Where's Danny? Nothing is going to happen. So he dragged the bench, but it was on top of. It happened on the second story, but the floor was made out of shayish, just to taich. And he did it in front of Rabbi Yitzchak ben Eliezer. Here again, we're trying to learn a din from the fact that there was no protest. And Amar lei isha tuki lach kedishtiko lechavrai Rabbi Yehuda. If I'll be silent, the way the prior story happened, that what? That when Rabbi Yehuda filled up the Shefefere Shel Beitzah, people were quiet. So what did he try to extrapolate? People are moidef, I'm not going to make a protest. Nafik minei churba. People are going to think that what? That everyone is moidef, you can drag a bench. But you cannot drag a bench. And why can you not drag a bench? Why? Because what does Rabbi Yehuda hold? That davar she'ein mischaven is also asur. And not only is davar she'ein mischaven asur, but even when they're dragging it on a marble floor, the Rabbi Yehuda will hold you also may not do it. Because it's one direct gezeda. Don't drag. Because you might end up making because gezeda alisa the sheisha atu alisa the alman. Okay. Now, Reish Kedishta, the Reish Kedishta is the president of the shul in Batzra. Garar Safsula, he dragged a bench, Le'ela, in front of Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbah, the great Rabbi Yirmiyah. Now guys, this was not on a marble floor. Or maybe it was.
What's the problem with giving the marble floor?
No, the problem is when it's an earthen floor. When you drag something, it might make a furrow in the ground. Making a furrow in the earth, Yakir, is either called chayrish, or if it's a hole, in some cases, it's going to be connected to binyan. On the other hand, you're not intending to make a furrow. You're not intending to build. You simply want to get the bench from here to there. And you don't want to exert yourself. You don't have to pick it up. So even if it makes a furrow, Rab Shimon holds you violated nothing. Mutter lachatchila, because davar she'ein mischaven is mutter. Rabbi Yehuda agrees that if it made a furrow, you didn't violate a biblical malacha because you had no intention, but it's asur midarabanan. Davar she'ein mischaven, Rabbi Yehuda oiser, Rab Shimon matir. Here we're adding that the shita that holds that it is asur across the board. Says the Gemara.
It wasn't a marble floor.
It was proper floor. So they dragged the bench in front of Rabbi Yirmiyah. The whole sugi is about something happening. Did you protest or not? What does it mean? So Amar lei kaman kerab Shimon. You are doing it. You reish kenishta, because obviously you subscribe to Rab Shimon. Now we're going to learn a big chiddush, which is going to be refuted. We're going to say the machlokes Rabbi Yehuda but Rab Shimon is not always. When does Rab Shimon say that since it's not certainly going to make a furrow, since it's not what we call psik reisha, you are allowed to do it because that's not your intention? That's only if the bench is big doilim, meaning it's a large bench, and if you would have to lift it up as per the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, you're going to schwitz. I don't want to schwitz. It's hard. And it's not that big that it's certainly going to make a furrow, because if dragging the bench will certainly make a furrow, Abaya, v'Rava, the Amri Tarvayu, moider Rab Shimon b'psik reisha v'lo yomos, that you're chayiv midoraisa. That means it makes sense. I'm looking for a heter because it's heavy. The case of the synagogue in Batzra was that the table or the bench was light. He holds that even Rab Shimon will say pick it up, the lo yefshed. But Mektane, Miyamar. Wow. And the Gemara wants you to know that this statement, that limits their argument only where it's difficult to carry it, is exactly the opposite of the way Ula limited the machlokes in the opposite direction. Upliga the Ula. The Amar Ula, mamash punkt fakert. Where do they argue Bektanim? Listen to this. So Rabbi Yehuda holds, come on, it's so light, pick it up. Aval bigedoilim, whenever you needing to pick up whatever you're dragging, whatever you would otherwise drag, is hard. Even Rabbi Yehuda is moide, you can do it. This is a big wow. Now we're going to reject that. Okay, so we have two shitas, minakotze, elakotze, limiting one side or the other, the machlokes of davar she'ein mischaven. Frek the Gemara Masav Rabbi Yosef, guys, Yakir, this Masav is going to be on both. Don't limit their argument. It says in a Braisa, Rab Shimon Omer, that's ground zero of this topic. Goyrer Adam, a man is allowed to drag either a bed relatively is gedolim. Kisei, chair is relative small. A bench is like in between. Safsal, you can drag it on the earth. You might end up making a furrow in the ground. That's not your intention. End of quote. Says the Gemara, asks Rav Yosef, it says in this Braisa an example of a bed, which is gedolim. It says in this Braisa an example of a chair, ktanim. And therefore, kashya litarvayu. We just had two Amiroim limiting their machlokes. This proves they're both wrong. It's across the board. Says the Gemara, hold on. Ula can faren for this. L'taimei and Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabba metaretz l'taimei. Ula metaretz l'taimei. Since the Braisa gives various examples, yes, I know you mentioned the bed, but since you mention it together with the chair, who says a bed is gedolim? A bed, a baby bed, a shkoyach. And that's why it's dumya de kisei. Same thing in the opposite. Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabba metaretz l'taimei, kisei dumya de mita. A very large chair. Gemara says, no. Masiv Rabba is going to refute this, guys. We're going to quote a Mishnah in Kalayim. Mishnah says, Moichrei Ksus, people that sell garments. And they have Kalayim. Now, have Kalayim, they have woolen begodim, they have linen begodim. We may not wear them together. One of the ways you would sell your merchandise is by modeling it. You would put it on. So it says, Moichran kedarkon. You can wear them. Look inside Rashi, 5 lines under the Gemara. Moichran kedarkon. It's a Mishnah in Kalayim. Ksus shal Kalayim, even if the ksus is made out of Kalayim proper. Loif shoy bashuk, kadei laharoisoi lemoichroi. You're showing it to the potential client. Are you wearing kalayim? What type of kalayim may you not wear? Only if you're wearing it because the purpose of wearing something is to warm yourself up, to protect yourself from the elements. And therefore, even putting it on your shoulder without sticking your hands in the sleeve is also asur if you're doing it to benefit from the beged, from the sun, from the rain. And there it sits as you're benefiting from it. It's a baguette. Here, you're only modeling it. You're not wearing it to wear it. You're wearing it to show it off. You are allowed to do it. Now it says, let's go back into the Mishnah. Don't have such, what happens if it's cold? Don't have that kavanah. That's a big problem. The big problem is that obviously, guys, this Mishnah is following the Shita of Rab Shimon, that if it's davar she'ein mischaven, it's okay, lechatchila, but again, everyone says, ultimately, both Abaye and Rava came to the same conclusion, that even Rab Shimon is moida, that if it's psik reisha v'lo yamas, if for sure you're going to end up doing the violation, it's considered mischaven. So Tosfos says, the last Tosfos in the Amid, the case of the Mishnah must be ube'inyan deloy have a psik reisha. For example, if it's cold, anyways you're wearing many malbushim. Daran and other Rishonim have a big chiddush here. And they say no, they argue with Tosfos. They say that when do we have an issue with psik reisha? If the violation is either Melechas Shabbos Yontif, so if I'm schlepping the bench is so heavy, it's for sure going to make a furrow. It's not my intention. I'm not plowing. It's my backyard. Rab Shimon says you can't do it. You are making a furrow. Chayiv midorais. Or if the isur is an isur achila. The problem with the kalayim is hana'ah. By isurei hana'ah, if you don't have kavanah to have hana'ah, even if it's going to happen, there's no concept of psik reisha. L'chaim, that's a big concept. Let's leave that. Let's go back inside the Gemara. Then the Mishnah says, "V'hatsunuyim." Psurim means people that are discreet. Like a chassid. You're going beyond the letter of the law. You're selling kala, even though you can do it. Mafshilin b'makol achireim. They wouldn't wear it. They would have a stick and they would hang it on the stick. They would model it in an inferior way. End of quote. Says the Gemara, asks Rabba, v'ha here, you're trying to limit the machloikas. If it's easy. Everyone can do it this way. The efshalim evet kitzunoyim. It's easy. Don't wear the beged kalayim. Put it on a stick. This should be similar to the piece of furniture that's small, that it's easy to bring it. V'chi loy mischavin shari Rab Shimon lechatchila. So indeed, to yufta the Rab Yirmiyah Rabba to yufta. Very good. We'll stop over here. God willing to be continued.